My own training began in India in the early 1970s. I had met some students of the Dalai Lama's older brother who had become a professor in Indiana, and they informed me that the Dalai Lama was opening a school for Western people in Dharamsala. So I traveled and studied there, and beginning in the early 70s, 1972. So at that time, all of the great lamas were all quite old, and they'd escaped from Tibet, and they didn't speak any English. And after arriving in India, the Dalai Lama had sent some young tulkus to America, basically to learn English and come back and translate for them. So you could say the older teachers taught in a very formal, classical way, because that's the world they came from. And it was very beautiful and very heart-touching, you could say. Little slow, because I think in the Buddhist world in Tibet, they saw kind of growth as an organic unfolding, like a lotus unfolding as petals kind of thing. So it was kind of slower in terms of getting information. But in terms of the pacing, it made it very easy for the internalization, for the practice, you could say, the hours of meditation and application we had a bit of advantage. And then Dalai Lama, after his 1963 statement, had said, you know, especially young lamas have to learn English and have to learn, not English, some foreign languages, and learn Western culture, because our services will be very important in this role for the next century. So he said it very clearly. So wherever Dharma has gone, Enlightenment tradition, from India through various countries and cultures, it's always cross-fertilized with them and created something like, you could say, a fashion or a style or a texture, an aesthetic of its own, and quite successfully so in many, many countries. As it comes to the West, certainly it will fuse with various of our Western traditions. And I think lamas today, young lamas today, certainly don't have the depth of training of the old ones. And many of them, for instance, let's say in the monasteries of Nepal, they really grow up in the city. Bodhanath now is completely a city. It's part of Kathmandu Valley, and several million people living in that valley. So it's very different than growing up in a remote monastery in Tibet with no distraction. Of course, they all have smartphones and laptops and all of this. But I think nonetheless, those tulkus and those lamas, khenpos and geshes who have gone to Western universities, and mainly the ones who studied psychology in university, people like Trungpa, Sogyal Tulku and so forth, they weren't terribly well trained as young tulkus, but that may have been to their advantage because they had to drink deeply of what they had received, and going to Western universities, British universities, learning psychology, pop psychology, and really helped them linguistically to put Dharma into meaningful language. If we look at other movements, like in America, the Vipassana movements from Satipatthana and Vipassana movements from Thailand and Burma has largely been taught and practiced through psychology graduates, people like Jack Kornfeld and the such. And their training in Western psychology has given one of the better linguistic platforms for talking about Buddhism, talking about enlightenment. Because of course, enlightenment is really talking about transforming the mind into living with complete fulfillment within its physical body boat, if you will. And it's possible that all great teachers are some kind of emanation, you could say. And for that reason, Dalai Lama, when he started traveling in the West in the late 70s, after things had settled in India with the refugees, and he could get away from just organizing the refugee committees and creating helping to reestablish all the training systems and the schools for young people and all that. Whenever he traveled, one thing he requested in each city that he visited was there should be some kind of interfaith gathering. So usually it'd be him and whoever was the local cardinal and perhaps one of the archbishop of some Christian tradition. And if there were any Hindus around, that would be one of them would end up on stage and so on. And so Dalai Lama has always very much promoted that sense of the root of all traditions being positive and going in positive directions. The main problem I think you have with religions is governments will always try to use them to their own purposes. And institutions might become more important than the people in the institutions. And that's certainly happened in many, many cases with all traditions. In the West, Dharma will take its own shape and its own form. We could say that as the seeds of Dharma have traveled around the planet, they've sprouted with beautiful flowerings everywhere they have gone. And certainly at some point or another, there might be a little bit of an overgrowth, and some of those flowerings might be a little bit on the growing up in the shade, so to speak. But yeah, so the Buddhist idea is Dharma will last 5,000 years. We're 1956 when the Dalai Lama first visited India for the celebration of the 2,500th year since Buddha's passing. Nehru Gandhi created that meeting, brought Buddhist masters from all over the world to celebrate the half-life of Buddhism, you could say. So when I first, one of my first meetings with Dalai Lama was about 20 or 30 people, and someone said, "Oh, well, it seems like the earth is coming to an end." And I said, and it looks like humans are going to destroy them. And Dalai Lama goes like this, "With this earth?" They said, "Well, according to our prophecy, 2,500 years." He said, "But certainly we'll have some ups and downs." And I think that's very true. I think we are just past the halfway point. And sometimes something I often say is every 500 years, Dharma changes. And this is a prophecy of Buddha. He said the 500 years comes in, the 5,000 years comes in 10 500-year chapters. And the halfway point started in 1956, the next chapter, which will be the 6th chapter. And the 6th chapter, according to the Buddha's prophecy, is his Dharma spreads flowers in the West. And hopefully it will end the West's love for war, for violence, for killing, for arms manufacture and arms sales, for creating wars in foreign countries as ways of great profits in getting, selling your bombs and your guns and your airplanes and so forth. And often we say Dharma is the way of peace. Of course, humans will never have complete peace, but they can learn to live in basic, a modicum, a healthy dose of peace. Yeah.